While my daughter Sarah was fighting for her life in the ICU, hooked up to machines that beeped like countdown timers to hell, her husband Marcus was grinding against some 20-something blonde at Club Mirage, buying shots for strangers and acting like he didn't have a care in the world. I know because I saw him there. With my own damn eyes. If you've ever felt that moment when your world tilts sideways and everything you thought you knew becomes a lie, then you'll understand what happened to me that October night in 2019. And if you're watching this from wherever you are, Chicago, Phoenix, small town anywhere, drop a comment and let me know, because this story is for anyone who's ever been pushed too far. Sarah had been rushed to Northwestern Memorial that afternoon. Severe complications from what should have been routine gallbladder surgery. The doctors were using words like sepsis and critical condition. And there I was, 63 years old, pacing that sterile hallway like a caged animal, calling Marcus over and over. Straight to voicemail. Every single time. The nurse, Janet, sweet woman with kind eyes that had seen too much, she kept checking on me. "Mr. Richardson, you should eat something. Your daughter's stable for now." But how could I eat when my baby girl, my only child, was lying there pale as winter snow, and her husband of 8 years had just vanished? I'd raised Sarah alone after her mother died when she was 12. Breast cancer took Linda fast and cruel, and it was just Sarah and me against the world after that. I worked double shifts at the Ford plant in Dearborn, came home exhausted but never too tired to help with homework, or listen to her talk about boys or dreams or whatever filled her teenage heart. She was everything to me. Still is. When she brought Marcus home 6 years ago, I wanted to like him. Really, I did. He was handsome enough, tall, athletic, that easy smile that made people trust him instantly. He worked in tech sales, made decent money, treated Sarah well in front of me. But there was something I couldn't quite put my finger on. A slickness. Like he was always performing, always calculating his next move. Sarah was smitten. Completely head over heels, talking about him like he'd hung the moon. And who was I to rain on her parade? She deserved happiness. After watching her mother waste away, after being the man of the house at such a young age, Sarah deserved someone who would love her unconditionally. But that night in the hospital, as I sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, something dark was growing in my chest. A suspicion I didn't want to name. It was almost midnight when I decided to drive to their house on Maple Street. Maybe Marcus was sick, I told myself. Maybe his phone died. Maybe there was some perfectly reasonable explanation for why my daughter's husband couldn't be bothered to show up when his wife was clinging to life. The house was dark. Empty. His BMW wasn't in the driveway. That's when I remembered Sarah mentioning that Marcus had been going out more lately. Networking events, he called them. Building connections for potential clients. She'd seemed a little hurt by it, if I'm being honest. Said he'd been distant, staying out later, being secretive with his phone. But Sarah, God love her, always gave people the benefit of the doubt. Always looked for the good in everyone. I drove around aimlessly for an hour, checking parking lots, looking for that silver BMW with the vanity plate that read MRCS 2015, the year they got married. I was about to give up, about to drive back to the hospital and tell myself I was being paranoid, when I saw it. Parked right outside Club Mirage on Rush Street. Now, Club Mirage isn't some dive bar. It's one of those upscale places where young professionals go to see and be seen. Dark lighting, expensive drinks, music so loud you have to shout to be heard. Not exactly the kind of place you go for networking, unless your network consists of 20-somethings in short skirts and guys with more money than sense. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, engine running, heater blasting against the October cold, trying to convince myself to leave. Maybe he was just having a drink to cope with the stress. Maybe he needed to clear his head before facing the hospital. People grieve differently, right? But then I saw him through the window. Marcus was at the bar, laughing, actually laughing, with some blonde girl who couldn't have been older than 25. His arm was around her waist like they were old friends, or maybe more than friends. She was leaning into him, whispering something in his ear, and he was eating it up like candy. The sight of it hit me like a physical blow. While my daughter was fighting for her life, while machines were keeping her alive, while I was sitting alone in that hospital waiting for some doctor to tell me whether she'd see morning, her husband was playing grab-ass with some stranger. I wanted to storm in there. Wanted to drag him out by his collar and beat some sense into him in the middle of Rush Street. But something stopped me. Some instinct told me to wait. To watch. To gather information before I made my move. Because in that moment, as I watched Marcus buy another round of shots for his new friend, as I saw him check his phone and dismiss what I assumed was another call from the hospital, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't grief or stress or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was who Marcus really was. And Sarah had no idea. I drove back to the hospital with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, rage and heartbreak warring in my chest. I found Sarah awake, groggy from medication but alert enough to ask about Marcus. The hope in her eyes when she looked toward the door, expecting him to walk in at any moment, nearly broke me. He's dealing with some work emergency. I lied. He'll be here soon. But Marcus didn't show up that night. Or the next morning. He finally strolled into that hospital room at 2 in the afternoon, looking perfectly put together, smelling like expensive cologne, with a story about how his phone had died and he'd been stuck in meetings all night and morning. Sarah believed every word. Thanked him for working so hard to provide for them during this difficult time. Apologized for being in the hospital and making things complicated. And Marcus? Marcus just smiled and kissed her forehead and played the devoted husband while I sat there knowing exactly where he'd been, exactly what he'd been doing while she'd been fighting for her life. That's when I knew. This wasn't going to end with a conversation or a confrontation or some family intervention. Marcus had shown me who he really was, and Sarah was too trusting, too loving, too pure to see it. But I saw it. And I was going to do something about it. If you've ever loved someone so much that their pain becomes your pain, their betrayal becomes your betrayal, then hit that subscribe button, because what I did next, what I discovered over the following weeks, it's going to shock you just as much as it shocked me. The thing about discovering your son-in-law is a lying, cheating piece of garbage is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every interaction becomes suspicious. Every smile feels calculated. Every "I love you," he says to your daughter sounds like chalk on a blackboard. Sarah recovered over the next 2 weeks, thank God. The doctors managed to get the infection under control, and she came home weak but alive. I stayed with them for a few days to help out, watching Marcus play the perfect husband, bringing her soup, fluffing her pillows, posting loving messages on social media about his brave, beautiful wife. It was all performance. Every last bit of it. While Sarah napped in the afternoons, I'd catch Marcus on his phone in the kitchen, typing messages with the kind of secretive urgency that makes your skin crawl. When I walked into the room, he'd flip the phone face down and give me that practiced smile. Just work stuff, Tom. You know how it is. But I was starting to know exactly how it was. See, people always underestimate older folks. They think because you've got gray hair and reading glasses that you're not paying attention. That you don't understand technology or modern life or what's really going on around you. Marcus made that mistake with me, and it was going to cost him everything. I started small. Basic observation. I noted when he left the house, when he came home, the stories he told Sarah about where he'd been. I started a little notebook, old school, pen and paper, because I learned a long time ago that if you want to catch a liar, you have to keep track of their lies. Marcus claimed he was working late 3 nights that first week Sarah was home. Said he had to make up for lost time, had some big deals closing. But on Tuesday night, I drove past his office building on Michigan Avenue around 8 o'clock. Empty parking lot. Dark windows. No sign of the dedicated husband burning the midnight oil. So where was he? I found out Thursday night when I decided to expand my surveillance. I parked across from their house at 7 p.m., just as Marcus was leaving. He'd kissed Sarah goodbye, Told her he had a client dinner that might run late. I followed that silver BMW through downtown traffic, keeping my distance, feeling like some character in a movie I never wanted to be part of. He didn't go to a restaurant. He went to a different club, this one called Vertigo on North State Street. Same type of place as Club Mirage. Same kind of crowd. Same kind of young women looking for a good time with a guy who had money to spend. I watched him meet the same blonde from that first night. They hugged like old friends, like people who'd been in touch, making plans, building something while my daughter was laid up in bed trusting her husband to be faithful. Her name, I'd learn later, was Brittany Chin. 26 years old, worked as a marketing coordinator for some startup company. Pretty girl, but with that hard edge that comes from too many nights in places like Vertigo, too many relationships with married men who promise things they'll never deliver. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That night, I sat in my truck for 3 hours watching Marcus and Brittany laugh and drink and dance like they didn't have a care in the world. Around 11, they left together. I followed them to a hotel on East Superior Street, the kind of place that's expensive enough to feel classy but anonymous enough that you don't worry about running into anyone you know. They were in there for 2 hours. When Marcus finally came out, alone, straightening his tie and checking his watch, I wanted to follow him home. Wanted to confront him right there in that hotel parking lot. But something told me to wait. To gather more evidence. To be absolutely certain before I destroyed my daughter's marriage and potentially her happiness. Because what if I was wrong? What if there was some explanation I couldn't see? What if this was all some terrible misunderstanding? But deep down I knew. You always know. I started following Marcus regularly after that. Not every night. I'm not crazy, but enough to establish patterns. Tuesday nights were for Brittany. Thursday nights too, usually. Sometimes Friday if Sarah was working late at the accounting firm where she'd just gotten promoted. He had it down to a science. He'd tell Sarah he had work obligations, client dinners, networking events. He'd even show her his calendar sometimes, pointing to fake appointments he'd created to cover his tracks. The level of planning, the calculated deception, it was breathtaking in its cruelty. But Marcus wasn't just cheating with Brittany. Oh no, that would have been too simple. The following week, I watched him meet a different woman at yet another club. This one was a redhead named Jessica. I learned her name by getting close enough to overhear their conversation. She was older than Brittany, maybe early 30s, divorced, worked in real estate. They had a different dynamic, less giggly flirtation, more intense chemistry. The kind of attraction that burns hot and fast and leaves wreckage in its wake. 2 women. 2 separate relationships. 2 elaborate webs of lies, all while Sarah was at home believing her husband was working hard to build their future together. The worst part? He was good at it. Really good. He kept his stories straight, never mixed up details, always had receipts for the dinners he claimed to have at restaurants he never visited. He'd figured out how to expense personal meals as business costs, how to use company credit cards for hotel rooms, how to live a double life without leaving obvious financial trails. I started wondering how long this had been going on. Months? Years? Had Marcus ever been faithful to Sarah, or had their entire marriage been built on lies? One evening, about 3 weeks after Sarah's surgery, I was having dinner with them at their house. Sarah was feeling stronger, back to her old self, chatting about getting back to work full-time. She was talking about maybe starting a family soon, how the health scare had made her realize how precious life was, how she wanted to give me grandchildren while I was still young enough to enjoy them. Marcus sat there nodding and smiling, playing the supportive husband, but I saw something flicker across his face when she mentioned kids. Something that looked like panic. That's when it hit me. Marcus didn't want a future with Sarah. He wanted the comfortable present, the stable home base, the respectable wife, the good reputation that came with being married to someone like my daughter. But commitment? Real commitment? Kids and mortgages and growing old together? He was already planning his exit strategy. These other women weren't just affairs. They were auditions for his next life. After dinner, as Sarah was loading the dishwasher, Marcus stepped outside to take a Work call. I followed him onto the back deck and watched him through the sliding glass door as he texted someone, grinning at whatever response he got. When he came back inside, Sarah asked who had called. Just Peterson from the Milwaukee account, Marcus said smoothly. Guy never sleeps. Always working deals at weird hours. Another lie. So smooth, so practiced, so effortless. That night, driving home to my empty house in Lincoln Park, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't just going to catch Marcus cheating. I wasn't just going to expose him to Sarah and let the chips fall where they may. I was going to destroy him. Completely. Systematically. The way he was destroying my daughter's trust, her heart, her future. But I had to be smart about it. I had to be patient. Because men like Marcus, they're like cockroaches. Shine a light on them too early, and they scatter. You have to wait for the perfect moment, when they're exposed and vulnerable, when there's nowhere left to run. And for those of you watching from places where betrayal feels all too familiar, from Detroit to Denver, from small towns where everyone knows everyone's business, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the courts, or the cops or playing by the rules. Sometimes you have to make your own justice. So I kept watching. Kept documenting. Kept planning. Because Marcus had no idea what was coming for him. You want to know what 3 months of surveillance teaches you about a cheating husband? Everything. Every lie he tells, every excuse he makes, every moment of fake affection he gives your daughter while planning his next rendezvous with someone else. By January 2020, I had a file on Marcus Thompson that would have impressed the FBI. Times, dates, locations, photographs, yes, photographs. I'd invested in a decent camera with a zoom lens, the kind private investigators use. Amazing what you can buy on Amazon these days. I had pictures of Marcus and Brittany going into the Superior Hotel 17 different times. I had photos of him with Jessica at 3 different restaurants, always paying cash, always choosing places far from their neighborhood where Sarah might see them. I had timestamps showing that when Marcus claimed to be in client meetings, he was actually getting cozy with women who definitely weren't discussing quarterly projections. But the real breakthrough came when I decided to go digital. Now, I'm not some computer expert. I worked with my hands for 40 years, building cars, fixing machinery, solving problems with wrenches and know-how. But my generation isn't as helpless with technology as people think. When you're motivated, when someone you love is being systematically betrayed, you learn what you need to learn. I hired a private investigator named Danny Kowalski. Ex-Chicago PD, ran a small agency out of an office in Wicker Park. Danny was old school, probably in his 50s, with the kind of weathered face that comes from seeing too much of humanity's ugly side. But he was thorough, discreet, and most importantly, he understood what I was trying to accomplish. "You want me to catch your son-in-law cheating," Danny said during our first meeting, looking over the notebook I'd brought him. "This is pretty comprehensive stuff you've got here, Tom. You sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes ignorance really is bliss." I thought about Sarah, about the way she lit up when Marcus walked into a room, about how she'd started talking more seriously about starting a family. About the trust in her eyes that I knew would be shattered when she learned the truth. "She deserves to know," I told Danny. "And he deserves to face consequences." Danny nodded slowly. "Consequences. That's an interesting word choice. What kind of consequences are we talking about here?" I didn't answer that question directly. Wasn't ready to, not even to myself. But I think Danny understood. He'd been around long enough to recognize the difference between a man who wanted information and a man who wanted justice. "Give me 2 weeks," he said. "I'll get you everything you need." Danny's investigation revealed things that made my amateur surveillance look like child's play. Marcus wasn't just cheating with 2 women, he was cheating with at least 4. Maybe 5. Danny found credit card records for hotel rooms, restaurant meals, and gifts that painted a picture of a man living multiple secret lives. There was Brittany, the marketing coordinator I'd discovered first. There was Jessica, the real estate agent. But there was also Amanda, a nurse from Mercy Hospital who worked night shifts and could meet Marcus during odd hours. And Stephanie, a flight attendant he'd apparently met during a business trip to Atlanta 6 months earlier. Each relationship was carefully compartmentalized. Each woman thought she was special, thought she was the one Marcus was planning to leave his wife for. He told Brittany that his marriage was loveless, that he and Sarah were basically roommates. He told Jessica that Sarah was unstable, emotionally demanding, that he was staying in the marriage out of pity. He told Amanda that Sarah couldn't have children and refused to consider adoption, that he was desperate to be a father someday. All lies. Sarah was the most loving, stable, hopeful person I'd ever known. And the fertility issue? Complete fabrication. Sarah had been cleared by her doctor just 2 months earlier. They'd been trying to get pregnant, and Marcus knew there was no medical reason it hadn't happened yet. But the lies revealed something crucial. Marcus wasn't just a cheater. He was a predator. He studied these women, figured out what they wanted to hear, and told them exactly that. He made each one feel like she was saving him from something, like she was the answer to problems he'd invented. "This guy's a sociopath," Danny told me when he delivered his final report. "I've seen a lot of cheaters, Tom, but this is different. This is systematic. Calculated. He's not just having affairs, he's running cons on multiple women simultaneously." The report was 3 inches thick. Financial records, phone logs, photographs, even transcripts of conversations Danny had recorded using equipment I didn't want to know too much about. Evidence that would hold up in any divorce court, that would destroy Marcus's reputation and potentially his career. But more importantly, it gave me leverage. Because buried in all that documentation was something Danny probably hadn't expected to find. Marcus was embezzling money from his company. It started small, padding expense reports, submitting receipts for fake client dinners to cover his actual dinner dates with his mistresses. But it had escalated over the past year. Marcus had figured out how to manipulate the company's client entertainment budget, how to bill personal expenses as business costs, how to skim money from deals in ways that would be almost impossible to detect without knowing exactly what to look for. Danny estimated Marcus had stolen nearly $40,000 over 18 months. Not enough to make him rich, but enough to fund his lifestyle of hotels and expensive dinners and gifts for women who weren't his wife. "You could turn this over to his company," Danny said. "They'd fire him, probably press charges. He'd be looking at jail time. I could have done that. Should have done that, maybe. But something in me wanted more than just Marcus losing his job or spending a few months in county jail. I wanted him to understand what it felt like to have your entire world collapse. I wanted him to feel the same helplessness Sarah would feel when she learned the truth about their marriage. I wanted him to suffer. Over the next 2 weeks, I studied that report like it was the Bible. I memorized every detail, every date, every lie Marcus had told. I built a timeline of his deception that stretched back almost to the beginning of his marriage to Sarah. This wasn't a recent development, wasn't a midlife crisis or a momentary weakness. This was who Marcus was, a man who treated relationships like business transactions, who saw other people as resources to be exploited. The hardest part was watching Sarah during this time, seeing how happy she was, how hopeful about their future. She'd started talking about looking at houses with better school districts. She'd been researching preschools, talking to friends about pediatricians. Building dreams on a foundation that was rotten to the core. Marcus, meanwhile, was getting sloppy. Success had made him overconfident. He started staying out later, offering weaker excuses, spending more money. One night, he came home with what was obviously a hickey on his neck, claiming he'd bumped into a cabinet at work. Sarah believed him, suggested he put ice on the bruise, even offered to call his supervisor to make sure the office was safe. That night, sitting at my kitchen table at 2 a.m., looking at photographs of my daughter's husband with other women, I made my final decision. I wasn't going to just expose Marcus. I wasn't going to just destroy his marriage and his career and his reputation. I was going to make him destroy himself. And for those of you out there who've ever watched someone you love get taken advantage of, who felt that burning rage that comes from seeing pure evil masquerade as love, you know exactly why I couldn't let this go. Drop a comment if you're from a place where people still believe in consequences, whether that's Texas or Ohio or anywhere in between, because what I did next required patience, planning, and a kind of cold calculation I didn't know I was capable of. The trap was set. Marcus just didn't know it yet. March 2020 changed everything for everyone, but for my plans against Marcus, the pandemic was almost perfect timing. When Chicago went into lockdown, when everyone was stuck at home, when normal life ground to a halt, Marcus's carefully constructed world of lies started falling apart. You see, it's hard to claim you're working late when everyone's working from home. It's impossible to have client dinners when restaurants are closed. Marcus's usual playbook became useless overnight, and I watched him squirm as he tried to adapt. Sarah, like everyone else, was working remotely from their home office. She was there all day, every day, which meant Marcus couldn't just disappear for hours without explanation. His affairs had to become more creative, more desperate, more risky. That's exactly what I was counting on. The first crack appeared in early April. Marcus claimed he needed to go into the office to handle some essential business that couldn't be done remotely. Sarah accepted this. She always accepted his explanations, but I knew better. I'd been monitoring his location using a little GPS tracker I'd attached to his BMW during one of his hotel visits. The device was about the size of a matchbox, magnetic, completely invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Marcus didn't go to his office. He drove straight to Brittany's apartment in Lincoln Park. But here's what he didn't know: Brittany was getting tired of him. I'd learned this through Danny's continued surveillance. She'd been asking Marcus when he was going to leave his wife, pushing him for a timeline, getting frustrated with the secretive nature of their relationship. The pandemic had made everything worse. She couldn't go out, couldn't date other people, was stuck in lockdown with nothing but promises from a married man who was increasingly unavailable. So I helped things along. Using a fake email account, I sent Brittany some of the photos Danny had taken of Marcus with Jessica. Not all of them. I wasn't ready to blow everything up yet. Just enough to plant seeds of doubt. Photos of Marcus holding hands with another woman, laughing intimately over dinner, clearly in a relationship that looked suspiciously similar to what he had with Brittany. The email was simple. Thought you should know what your boyfriend does when he's not with you. I never signed it, never identified myself. Let Brittany draw her own conclusions. The effect was immediate and beautiful. The next time Marcus went to see Brittany, I followed. The GPS tracker led me to her apartment building, but instead of the usual 2-hour romantic rendezvous, Marcus was back in his car within 20 minutes. Even from across the street, I could see he was angry, jaw tight, hands gripping the steering wheel, the body language of a man whose carefully laid plans had just exploded. He drove around aimlessly for an hour before going home. When he walked through the front door, Sarah asked how the office visit had gone. Fine, Marcus said, but his voice was tight. Just fine. One down. Over the next few weeks, I systematically destroyed Marcus's other relationships using the same method. Anonymous emails to Jessica showing her photos with Brittany. Information to Amanda revealing that Marcus had lied about Sarah being unable to have children. Evidence to Stephanie that Marcus wasn't separated from his wife, as he'd claimed, but very much living with her. Each revelation was perfectly timed, carefully calculated to cause maximum disruption to Marcus's world while leaving me completely invisible. These women didn't know who was exposing Marcus's lies, they just knew they'd been played. By May, Marcus had lost 3 of his 4 mistresses. Only Amanda remained, and she was becoming increasingly demanding, wanting more time, more attention, more promises about their future together. Meanwhile, Sarah was noticing changes in Marcus's behavior. He was irritable, distracted, constantly checking his phone and getting frustrated when there were no messages. He started picking fights over stupid things, Sarah leaving dishes in the sink, forgetting to buy his favorite coffee, watching TV shows he didn't like. I think the lockdown is getting to him, Sarah told me during one of our weekly phone calls. He seems so stressed lately. Maybe I should suggest he talk to someone, get some professional help. Even when her husband was treating her badly, Sarah's first instinct was to worry about his well-being. To find ways to help him through what she assumed was a difficult time. It broke my heart and strengthened my resolve in equal measure. But I wasn't done yet. Destroying Marcus's affairs was just the appetizer. The main course was going to be his career. Remember that embezzlement evidence Danny had uncovered? $40,000 stolen from his company through fraudulent expense reports and manipulated client accounts? I'd been sitting on that information for months, waiting for the right moment to use it. That moment came in June. Marcus's company, Synergy Solutions, was struggling during the pandemic like everyone else. They'd laid off 20% of their workforce, cut salaries across the board, and were scrutinizing every expense with microscopic attention. The kind of environment where financial irregularities that might have gone unnoticed during good times suddenly became glaring red flags. I sent an anonymous package to the company's CFO. No return address, no identifying information. Just copies of receipts, bank statements, and a detailed breakdown showing exactly how Marcus had been stealing money. The evidence was so comprehensive, so well organized, that it would have been impossible to ignore even if they'd wanted to. The investigation was swift and brutal. Within a week, Marcus was called into the office for what he thought was a routine meeting. He came home that afternoon looking like he'd been hit by a truck. "They suspended me," he told Sarah, slumping onto their couch like a defeated man. "Pending investigation into some financial discrepancies. It's all a misunderstanding, but—" Sarah rushed to comfort him, assured him that everything would work out, that good people like him always landed on their feet. She offered to pick up extra work, to cut back on expenses, to do whatever was necessary to support them through this difficult time. Marcus just sat there, letting her comfort him, accepting her support while knowing that everything she believed about him was a lie. 2 weeks later, he was fired. Not just fired, terminated for cause, with the threat of criminal charges hanging over his head if he didn't repay the stolen money immediately. Marcus had 30 days to come up with $40,000 or face prosecution for embezzlement. But here's the beautiful part: he couldn't ask Sarah for help without explaining why he needed the money. He couldn't take out a loan against their house without her signature. He couldn't liquidate their joint investments without raising questions about why he needed cash so desperately. He was trapped. And he was starting to panic. That's when Amanda, his last remaining mistress, delivered the final blow. She was pregnant. I found out about the pregnancy the same way I'd learned everything else about Marcus's secret life, through careful surveillance and Danny's network of contacts. Amanda had told Marcus during what she thought was a romantic dinner at a restaurant in Evanston. She'd probably expected him to be happy, to see this as their chance to finally be together, to build the family he'd been promising her. Instead, Marcus had reacted like a cornered animal. He demanded she get an abortion, offered to pay for it, insisted that having the baby would ruin both their lives. Amanda had refused. She was 32, had been trying to have children for years with her ex-husband before they divorced. This pregnancy felt like a miracle to her, and she wasn't about to end it for a man who was suddenly showing his true colors. So she gave Marcus an ultimatum: leave his wife and help raise their child, or she'd tell Sarah everything herself. Marcus had 7 days to decide. For those of you watching from places where karma feels like an old friend, from the mountains of Colorado to the plains of Kansas, you know exactly what was happening here. Marcus had spent years building a house of cards, and now every card was falling at exactly the same time. But the most beautiful part: he still had no idea I was the one knocking them down. By July 2020, Marcus Thompson was living in a pressure cooker, and I controlled the heat. He had 6 days left to decide whether to leave Sarah for Amanda and their unborn child, or face having his pregnant mistress expose everything to his wife. He had 22 days to come up with $40,000 to avoid criminal charges for embezzlement. He had 0 prospects for employment. Word was spreading through Chicago's tight-knit tech sales community about his financial irregularities, and nobody wanted to touch him. And through it all, Sarah continued to be the perfect wife. She'd taken on freelance accounting work to supplement their income while Marcus was between jobs. She was handling all their bills, managing their finances, even researching bankruptcy lawyers in case they needed to consider that option. She believed her husband was the victim of some corporate witch hunt, that his firing was unfair, that they just needed to weather this storm together. Marcus, meanwhile, was falling apart. I watched him during a family barbecue at their house that weekend. Sarah had insisted on maintaining some normalcy despite their financial stress. Marcus barely ate, kept checking his phone obsessively, jumped every time it rang. When Sarah asked if he was feeling all right, he snapped at her, accused her of nagging him, then immediately apologized and blamed his mood on job stress. "I've never seen him like this," Sarah confided to me while we were cleaning up in the kitchen. "It's like he's carrying some huge weight, you know? I wish he'd talk to me about what's really bothering him." If only she knew. That night, I made another anonymous call, this time to Amanda. I'd gotten her number from Danny's files and disguised my voice using one of those voice-changing apps you can download on any smartphone. "Marcus is never going to leave his wife," I told her. "He's just stringing you along until he can figure out how to make this problem disappear. You need to protect yourself and your baby." Amanda was smart enough to recognize the truth when she heard it. 3 days later, she showed up at Marcus and Sarah's house. I wasn't there when it happened, but Sarah told me about it later, still shaken by the encounter. A pregnant woman at their front door, asking for Marcus, claiming she needed to speak with him urgently about their relationship. Marcus had panicked, told Sarah it was a crazy former client who'd become obsessed with him. He'd hustled Amanda away from the house, promised Sarah he'd handled the situation, assured her it was nothing to worry about. But Sarah wasn't stupid. She might have been trusting, but she wasn't blind. Something about the woman's desperation, about Marcus's obvious terror at seeing her, had planted seeds of doubt. For the first time in 8 years of marriage, Sarah started paying attention to the inconsistencies in her husband's stories. She began asking questions. Where exactly had Marcus been during all those client meetings over the past year? Why were there charges on their credit card for restaurants she'd never been to? Who had been calling and hanging up when she answered the phone? Marcus's answers were getting weaker, more defensive. The smooth lies that had worked for years were cracking under pressure. When you're juggling that many deceptions, when you're that desperate and scared, it becomes impossible to keep all the stories straight. That's when I decided to accelerate the timeline. On July 20th, exactly 1 week before Amanda's deadline, I sent Sarah an envelope. No return address. No note. Just photographs. Marcus with Brittany at the Superior Hotel. Marcus with Jessica at dinner, holding hands across the table. Marcus kissing Amanda in the parking lot of Mercy Hospital. Marcus with Stephanie at O'Hare Airport, embracing like lovers, not business associates. 23 photographs in total. Clear, undeniable, devastating. I included one sheet of paper with dates and locations. Nothing more. Let the evidence speak for itself. Sarah called me 2 hours after the mail was delivered. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her at first. When she finally managed to speak coherently, her voice was hollow, broken in a way I'd only heard once before, the day we got her mother's cancer diagnosis. "Dad," she whispered, "I need you to come over. Please." I found her sitting at her kitchen table, those photographs spread out in front of her like a tarot reading from hell. Her face was pale, her hands shaking as she pointed to each image. "This is from last October," she said, voice barely audible. "I was in the hospital, and he was with her. While I was fighting for my life, he was with another woman." I sat down beside her, put my arm around her shoulders, let her cry against my chest like she had when she was 12 years old, and the world had first shown her how cruel it could be. "How long do you think this has been going on?" she asked. I could have told her everything. Could have shared Danny's report, shown her the timeline of betrayal that stretched back years. But seeing her break apart like this, watching the light go out of her eyes, I realized that some truths are too heavy to carry all at once. I don't know, sweetheart, I said. But it doesn't matter how long. What matters is what you do now. We talked for 3 hours. Sarah went through every stage of grief and fast forward: denial, anger, bargaining, depression. She blamed herself, wondered what she'd done wrong, asked if she'd been a bad wife, questioned every moment of happiness in their marriage. When Marcus came home that evening, late, as usual, with another transparent lie about job interviews, Sarah was waiting for him with the photographs spread across the coffee table like evidence in a murder trial. I wasn't there for that confrontation. Sarah had asked me to leave before he got home, said she needed to face this alone. But she called me at midnight, and from her voice, I could tell it had been brutal. Marcus had tried everything. Denied the photos were real. Claimed they were doctored. Insisted the women were just friends, that the images were taken out of context. When that didn't work, he'd shifted to blaming Sarah, said she'd been distant, cold, that he'd been lonely and made mistakes. Finally, when all his lies had been exhausted, he'd broken down and confessed. Not to everything, not to the embezzlement, not to the systematic nature of his deception, not to the pregnancy. Just to having some relationships. During difficult periods in their marriage, he'd begged for forgiveness. Promised to end all contact with other women. Suggested couples counseling. Sworn on his mother's grave that he would never betray her trust again. Sarah had listened to it all with the cold clarity that comes after shock. Then she told him to pack a bag and get out. Marcus had left that night, probably to stay with whatever friend would take him in, since his mistresses were no longer options. Sarah changed the locks the next morning. But here's the thing about men like Marcus: they don't give up easily. They don't accept consequences gracefully. They fight dirty when cornered. Over the next week, Marcus launched a campaign to win Sarah back that was both pathetic and calculating. Flowers delivered every day. Love letters slipped under the door. Text messages at all hours professing his devotion and promising to change. He showed up at her work, causing a scene in the lobby until security escorted him out. He called her friends and family members, spinning a story about how the photos were from a very dark period, when he'd been struggling with depression and had made mistakes he deeply regretted. He even tried to turn me against her, calling to suggest that Sarah was being unreasonable, and that I should encourage her to give him another chance. For the sake of their marriage. That conversation didn't go well for Marcus. "You have 48 hours to stop harassing my daughter," I told him. "After that, things are going to get very unpleasant for you." Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. "What are you going to do, old man? Beat me up? I'm not afraid of you." "You should be," I said and hung up. Because Marcus still didn't understand what he was dealing with. He thought this was just a marital dispute that would blow over. He thought if he applied enough pressure, made enough promises, played enough guilt cards, Sarah would eventually forgive him like she'd forgiven everything else over the years. He had no idea that his world was about to get much, much worse. Amanda's deadline was in 3 days. The embezzlement charges would be filed in 18 days if he didn't repay the money. And I had one more card to play, one that would destroy not just his marriage and his career, but his entire future. For everyone watching this from cities where second chances are earned, not given, whether you're in Seattle or Atlanta or anywhere people believe in consequences, you know that some men never learn until they lose everything. Marcus was about to get the education of his lifetime. Amanda made good on her threat exactly 7 days after her ultimatum expired. She didn't just tell Sarah about the affair and the pregnancy, she told everyone. Posted it on social media. Tagged Marcus's employer, his former employer, technically, but the post went viral in Chicago's professional circles. Sent detailed messages to Sarah's friends, family members, and coworkers explaining exactly what kind of man Marcus Thompson really was. The post included ultrasound photos of the baby she was carrying, screenshots of text messages where Marcus had promised to leave his wife, and a timeline of their relationship that made it clear this wasn't some brief fling but a calculated, long-term deception. Sarah called me at 6 a.m., her voice numb with shock. "She's pregnant, Dad. Marcus got another woman pregnant, And she's telling everyone that he promised to marry her. She has text messages. Photos of them together. Hotel receipts going back months. I drove over immediately, found Sarah sitting in her living room staring at her laptop screen, reading the comments on Amanda's Facebook post. Hundreds of them. People she knew, people Marcus knew, people from their church and neighborhood and professional networks, all expressing shock and disgust at the revelations. How many people knew? Sarah asked without looking up from the screen. How many people saw him with these women and said nothing? How many people have been laughing behind my back, thinking I was some pathetic fool who couldn't keep her husband satisfied? That question haunted me because I knew the answer. I'd known for months, had proof of everything, and had said nothing. Not because I was protecting Marcus, but because I'd been orchestrating something bigger. Something that required patience and perfect timing. But sitting there watching my daughter's humiliation play out in real time on social media, I wondered if I'd made the right choice. Maybe I should have told her the truth immediately. Maybe she deserved to make her own decisions about her marriage instead of having those decisions manipulated by her father's desire for revenge. Then Marcus showed up. He'd been staying at a hotel since Sarah kicked him out, but Amanda's public revelation had apparently pushed him past his breaking point. He came through the front door using his key, forgetting that Sarah had changed the locks and that entering without permission was now technically breaking and entering. Sarah screamed when she saw him. Not because she was afraid, but because she was furious. 8 years of suppressed anger, of overlooked red flags, of gut feelings she'd ignored because she'd wanted to believe the best about the man she loved, all of it came pouring out at once. I won't repeat everything she said to him, but it was magnificent and terrible and long overdue. She called him every name in the book, told him exactly what she thought of his lies and his betrayals and his pathetic attempts to win her back. Marcus tried to interrupt, to explain, to minimize the damage. But Sarah was beyond listening to his excuses. "A baby, Marcus?" she shouted. "You got another woman pregnant while we were trying to have a baby together? While I was tracking my ovulation and taking vitamins and seeing fertility doctors because I thought something was wrong with me?" That's when Marcus made his final, fatal mistake. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said. "The pregnancy was an accident. Amanda said she was on birth control. If she just handled it quietly, none of this would have been necessary." The room went completely silent. Even I, who thought I'd seen the depths of Marcus's selfishness, was shocked by the casual cruelty of that statement. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was deadly calm. "Get out," she said. "Get out of my house, get out of my life, and never contact me again. And Marcus? That baby you don't want. I hope she grows up to be everything you're not, honest, loyal, and decent. Because she deserves better than having you for a father." Marcus left, but not quietly. He slammed doors, kicked furniture, shouted threats about divorce lawyers and alimony and making sure Sarah didn't get a dime from him. Empty threats from a man with no money, no job, and no leverage, but they revealed his true character more clearly than anything else could have. After he was gone, Sarah and I sat in her kitchen drinking coffee and trying to process the wreckage of her marriage. She was calmer now, the initial shock and anger giving way to a kind of grim practicality. "I need to file for divorce," she said. "And I need to protect myself financially. Do you think he's been hiding money? Gambling? Doing drugs? I mean, where has all our money been going?" This was my moment. The perfect opportunity to tell Sarah about the embezzlement, about Marcus's systematic theft from his company, about the $40,000 he owed and couldn't repay. Information that would help her in the divorce, that would ensure she got everything she deserved while Marcus got exactly what he deserved. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the exhausted look in her eyes, or the way she kept touching her wedding ring even though she was talking about divorce. Maybe it was the knowledge that learning about the embezzlement would mean learning that her husband wasn't just unfaithful and cruel, but also a criminal. "Let's take this one step at a time," I said. "First, we get you a lawyer. Then we figure out the rest." Sarah nodded, but I could see she was thinking about something else. Dad, she said finally. Those photos someone sent me. They were taken by a professional. The angles, the quality. This wasn't some random person with a cell phone. Someone was watching Marcus, documenting his affairs. Someone wanted me to know the truth. My heart stopped. I'd been so careful, so thorough in covering my tracks. But Sarah was smarter than I'd given her credit for. She was starting to put pieces together. Do you think it was one of the other women? She asked. Maybe someone who got tired of his lies and decided to expose him? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Let her think it was Jessica or Brittany or Stephanie. Let her believe it was another victim of Marcus's manipulation rather than her own father's carefully planned revenge. But I could see the wheels turning in her head. Sarah was an accountant. She was trained to spot patterns, to notice when numbers didn't add up. And the numbers in her marriage hadn't been adding up for a long time. Over the next week, as she met with divorce lawyers and started the process of legally separating her life from Marcus's, she began uncovering financial irregularities that even I hadn't known about. Credit cards she'd never seen. A second checking account Marcus had opened without her knowledge. Mysterious cash withdrawals that didn't correspond to any legitimate expenses. The deeper she dug, the more she realized that her husband hadn't just been unfaithful, he'd been stealing from their marriage for years. He's been using our joint account to pay for his affairs, she told me during one of our daily phone calls. Hotel rooms, dinners, gifts, all of it charged to our credit cards or withdrawn from our savings. I've been paying for his betrayal without even knowing it. That's when I made another decision that would change everything. I called Danny Kowalski. I need you to give Sarah everything, I told him. The full report. All the evidence about the embezzlement. Everything you found about Marcus's financial crimes. Danny was quiet for a moment. You sure about this, Tom? Once she knows how deep this goes, there's no going back. And she's going to figure out that you're the one who hired me. I'd already figured that out. Sarah was too smart, too thorough, too determined to get to the truth. Eventually, she was going to trace the investigation back to me. And when she did, she was going to realize that her father had known about Marcus's betrayal for months and had chosen revenge over honesty. Just get her the information, I said. She deserves to know everything. 2 days later, Danny delivered his report to Sarah personally. All of it, the affairs, the embezzlement, the timeline of deception that stretched back to the beginning of her marriage. 3 inches of documentation that painted a picture of systematic betrayal and criminal behavior. Sarah called me after she'd finished reading it. Dad, she said, and her voice was different now. Colder. More distant. We need to talk. For those of you watching from places where family loyalty runs deep, from the hills of West Virginia to the farms of Iowa, you understand what was about to happen. I protected my daughter by destroying her husband, but in doing so, I'd betrayed her trust in a different way. The reckoning was coming. And I wasn't sure our relationship would survive it. Sarah came to my house on a Thursday evening in August 2020, carrying Danny's report like it was evidence in a murder trial. Which, in a way, it was, the murder of her marriage, her trust, and possibly our relationship. She sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd done homework as a teenager, where we'd planned her wedding 8 years earlier, where I taught her to play poker with penny stakes and let her win until she was old enough to earn her victories. The private investigator who compiled this report, she said, placing the thick folder between us. Daniel Kowalski. I called his office today. My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. Oh? He wouldn't tell me who hired him. Client confidentiality, he said. But he did tell me when the investigation started. October 2019. 3 months of surveillance, financial analysis, and documentation. Do you know what was happening in October 2019, Dad? I knew exactly what was happening. Sarah's surgery. Her fight with sepsis. The night I'd seen Marcus at Club Mirage while my daughter was in the ICU. Your surgery, I said quietly. My surgery, she confirmed. Someone hired a private investigator to follow my husband starting the exact same week I nearly died in that hospital. What are the odds of that being a coincidence? I could have lied. Could have acted surprised, suggested that maybe one of Marcus's other victims had hired Danny, that the timing was indeed coincidental. But looking at my daughter's face, intelligent, hurt, determined, I realized she already knew the truth. She was just giving me a chance to admit it. "How long have you known?" she asked when I didn't respond. The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire I'd started and could no longer control. "Since that first night," I said finally. "When you were in the hospital and Marcus was nowhere to be found. I went looking for him and found him at a club with another woman." Sarah's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, hurt, anger, disappointment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You've known for almost a year that my husband was cheating on me, and you said nothing?" "I was gathering evidence." "You were playing God." The words exploded out of her with a force that made me flinch. "You were making decisions about my life, my marriage, my future, without giving me any choice in the matter." She was right, and we both knew it. But I'd gone too far down this path to back down now. "What would you have done if I told you that first night?" I asked. "Would you have believed me? Would you have confronted Marcus without proof? Would you have left him based on one photograph from one night?" "I don't know," Sarah shouted. "But it would have been my decision to make. My choice. My life." She stood up from the table, pacing around my small kitchen like a caged animal. "Do you know what this feels like, Dad? Do you have any idea what it's like to realize that the two most important men in my life have both been lying to me? That neither of you thought I was strong enough or smart enough to handle the truth? That's exactly what it is." She stopped pacing and stared at me with eyes that looked disturbingly like her mother's when Linda was angry. "Marcus lied to me to protect his secrets. You lied to me to protect your plan for revenge. But you both made the same choice. You decided that I couldn't be trusted with the truth about my own life." The accusation hit harder than a physical blow because it was accurate. In my desire to protect Sarah from Marcus's betrayal, I had betrayed her myself. In my quest for justice, I had committed my own injustice. "I was trying to protect you," I said weakly. "No, you weren't." Sarah's voice was cold now, clinical in the way it got when she was working through complex financial problems. "You were trying to punish him. This was never about protecting me. It was about your need for revenge." She sat back down and opened Danny's report to a specific page she'd bookmarked. The anonymous emails to his mistresses, ending their relationships. The financial evidence sent to his company, getting him fired. The GPS tracker on his car. The photographs sent to me at exactly the right moment to cause maximum damage. She looked up at me. "This wasn't protection, Dad. This was warfare." I wanted to argue, to explain the rage I'd felt watching Marcus betray her trust, the satisfaction I'd taken in destroying his carefully constructed lies. But seeing the hurt in Sarah's eyes, I realized that my motivations didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. "You're right," I said. "I wanted him to pay for what he did to you. I wanted him to suffer the way you were going to suffer. And I wanted to control how and when that happened." Sarah nodded slowly. "At least you're being honest now. That's more than I got from Marcus." We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, I could hear my neighbors coming home from work, the ordinary sounds of ordinary lives that hadn't been blown apart by lies and betrayal and revenge. "There's more, isn't there?" Sarah asked finally. "The report mentions ongoing criminal investigation into Marcus's embezzlement. Anonymous tips to his employer. You didn't just document his crimes, you made sure he'd be prosecuted for them. He stole money from his company. He broke the law. And you made sure he'd face consequences for it. Just like you made sure his affairs would be exposed. Just like you orchestrated every aspect of his downfall." She leaned back in her chair, studying me like I was a stranger. "I'm starting to understand why Mom used to get frustrated with you sometimes. You always had to be the one solving problems, making decisions, fixing things. Even when the problems weren't yours to fix. The mention of Linda felt like salt in an open wound. But Sarah was right about that too. Her mother had sometimes accused me of being too controlling, too quick to take charge instead of letting other people handle their own lives. Your mother would have told you the truth immediately, I admitted. She would have shown you those first photos and let you decide what to do about them. Yes, she would have. Because she trusted me to make my own choices, even if they were difficult ones. Sarah closed the report and pushed it across the table toward me. I'm not saying Marcus didn't deserve what happened to him. He's a liar and a cheater and apparently a criminal. But that wasn't your decision to make. Those weren't your consequences to arrange. I knew she was right. Had known it for weeks, if I was being honest with myself. But the rage I'd felt watching Marcus destroy her trust had been so powerful, so consuming, that it had overridden my better judgment. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. I'm sorry I didn't trust you with the truth. I'm sorry I took control of your life instead of letting you control it yourself. And I'm sorry that my need for revenge hurt you almost as much as his betrayal did. Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring out my kitchen window at the empty street beyond. I don't know if I can forgive you right now, she said finally. Not because what you did was unforgivable, but because I need time to figure out who you really are. The father who raised me, who taught me to be independent and strong and to stand up for myself. Or the man who spent a year manipulating my life because he didn't think I could handle my own problems? She stood to leave, but paused at the kitchen doorway. For what it's worth, your plan worked. Marcus is destroyed. His career is over, his reputation is ruined, he's facing criminal charges, and he's lost everything that mattered to him. You got your revenge, Dad. I hope it was worth it. After she left, I sat alone in that kitchen for hours, thinking about the cost of justice and the price of revenge. I'd won the war against Marcus Thompson, but I might have lost the most important battle of my life. For everyone out there watching from places where family means everything, from small towns in Montana to big cities in Texas, you know that some victories aren't worth winning. Some prices are too high to pay. But the story wasn't over yet. Marcus still had moves left to make, and so did I. 3 weeks after my confrontation with Sarah, Marcus Thompson made his last desperate play for survival. And it nearly destroyed both of us. He'd been living in a cheap motel on the outskirts of Chicago, dodging process servers and creditors while his lawyer tried to negotiate some kind of plea deal on the embezzlement charges. The $40,000 he owed was now closer to $60,000 with interest and penalties, and he had no way to pay it. His former employer was demanding restitution, the IRS was investigating his tax returns, and Amanda was taking him to court for child support. But Marcus was like a wounded animal backed into a corner, dangerous because he had nothing left to lose. The attack came through Sarah's work. Marcus had somehow learned about my involvement in his downfall, maybe through his own investigation, maybe through educated guessing, and he decided that if he was going down, he was taking me with him. He filed a police report claiming I'd been stalking and harassing him. Said I'd hired private investigators to invade his privacy, planted tracking devices on his car, sent threatening messages to his employers and associates. He painted a picture of an unstable older man who'd become obsessed with destroying his son-in-law's life. The accusations were carefully crafted to contain just enough truth to be believable. Yes, I had hired a private investigator. Yes, I had sent anonymous information to his employer. Yes, I had been tracking his movements and documenting his activities. But Marcus's stroke of genius was connecting my surveillance to Sarah's workplace. He claimed that I'd used my daughter's position at her accounting firm to access financial records and client information that had helped me build the case against him. Suggested that Sarah had been complicit in my conspiracy to destroy his reputation and career. It was brilliant and evil and completely false, but it didn't matter. The accusation alone was enough to trigger an investigation at Sarah's company. They suspended her pending a full review of her access to client files, her computer usage, and any potential conflicts of interest related to her divorce proceedings. Sarah called me at midnight, her voice shaking with rage and panic. "They've suspended me, Dad. My own company thinks I used my position to help you spy on Marcus. I could lose my CPA license over this. I could lose everything I've worked for." I'd never felt smaller in my life. In my quest to protect Sarah from Marcus's betrayal, I'd opened her up to professional ruin. My revenge plot hadn't just cost me my relationship with my daughter, it had potentially destroyed her career. "We'll fight this," I told her. "We'll prove that you had nothing to do with my investigation. We'll—" "Stop," Sarah interrupted. "Just stop. Don't you see what's happening here? Marcus is using your obsession with revenge to hurt me even more. And you're still trying to fix problems you created in the first place." She was right. Again. Marcus had found the one move that could still cause maximum damage, turning my actions against Sarah, using my love for her as a weapon to hurt her. That night, I made a decision that I should have made months earlier. I called Marcus directly. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the smugness in his voice. Well, Tom Richardson. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. You want to destroy me? Fine. But you leave Sarah out of this. She had nothing to do with my investigation, and you know it." Marcus laughed, that same casual, cruel laugh I'd heard him use when dismissing his unborn child as an accident. "Your daughter is collateral damage, Tom. Just like I was collateral damage in your little revenge fantasy. How does it feel to know that your need to play God is going to cost Sarah everything she's worked for?" "What do you want?" I asked. "I want you to publicly admit that you orchestrated my downfall. I want you to confess to stalking, harassment, and invasion of privacy. I want you to take full responsibility for everything that's happened to me, and I want you to face whatever consequences come with that admission. And if I do that, you'll clear Sarah's name? I'll withdraw my accusations against her, yes. But I'm not promising she'll get her job back. Some bells can't be unrung, Tom. Some reputations can't be fully restored. You should have thought about that before you decided to play vigilante." I hung up the phone and spent the rest of the night thinking about the choice in front of me. I could confess to everything I'd done, face whatever criminal charges might result, and probably clear Sarah's name in the process. Or I could fight Marcus's accusations, drag the whole thing through the courts, and watch my daughter's career get destroyed in the crossfire. It wasn't really a choice at all. The next morning, I called Detective Angela Martinez at the Chicago Police Department and asked to schedule an interview about Marcus's stalking allegations. "I want to make a full confession," I told her. "But I also want to provide evidence about Marcus Thompson's criminal activities that your department needs to see." The confession took 6 hours. I told Detective Martinez everything about following Marcus, hiring Danny Kowalski, documenting the affairs, sending anonymous tips about the embezzlement. I explained my motives, accepted responsibility for my actions, and provided copies of every piece of evidence I'd gathered. But I also made sure the detective understood that Marcus was using false accusations to cover up his own crimes. I showed her the evidence of his embezzlement, his multiple affairs, his systematic deception of his wife and his employer. "This man isn't a victim," I told her. "He's a predator who got caught and is now trying to deflect blame onto anyone else he can find." Detective Martinez was thorough and professional. She took my statement, reviewed my evidence, and promised to investigate Marcus's counter-accusations against Sarah. "For what it's worth, Mr. Richardson," she said as we wrapped up the interview, "I've seen a lot of these cases. Men like Thompson, they always try to blame everyone else when their house of cards falls down. The fact that he's targeting your daughter tells me he knows you've got him dead to rights on the original charges." 3 days later, Marcus was arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and filing false police reports. The evidence I'd provided, combined with the detective's investigation into his claims about Sarah, had revealed the depth of his deception. But the damage to Sarah's career was real and lasting. Even though her company's investigation cleared her of wrongdoing, the cloud of suspicion remained. Clients questioned her integrity. Colleagues whispered about her involvement in her ex-husband's crimes. The professional reputation she'd built over 15 years was tarnished by association with Marcus's scandal and my revenge plot. She did eventually find another job, but at a smaller firm, for less money, with fewer opportunities for advancement. The cost of my justice had been her career trajectory, her professional standing, and her trust in the father who was supposed to protect her. Marcus pled guilty to embezzlement and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. He served 14 months in minimum security prison, paid partial restitution to his former employer, and lost his professional licenses. Amanda had their baby, a daughter named Hope, and moved back to her home state of Ohio where her family could help raise the child without Marcus's involvement. As for me, I was charged with harassment and invasion of privacy, pled guilty to reduced charges, and received 2 years of probation along with community service and mandatory counseling. Not exactly the outcome I'd envisioned when I started down this path, but not the worst-case scenario either. But the real punishment wasn't legal, it was personal. Sarah and I barely spoke for 8 months. When we did communicate, it was formal, distant, like business associates rather than father and daughter. She'd been right about everything. I had played God with her life. I had prioritized my need for revenge over her need for truth and autonomy. I had protected her from one betrayal by committing another. For everyone watching from places where justice and family loyalty sometimes conflict, whether you're in rural Alabama or downtown Detroit or anywhere people struggle with doing right versus doing right, you understand the impossible position I'd created for myself. I'd won the war against Marcus Thompson, but I'd lost something infinitely more valuable in the process. It's been almost 4 years since that October night when I first saw Marcus at Club Mirage, and I'm sitting here in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Sarah confronted me about my deception, trying to make sense of what I learned about justice, revenge, and the price of both. Sarah and I have rebuilt our relationship, slowly and carefully, like people walking through a minefield of past mistakes. It took 2 years of family counseling, countless difficult conversations, and my complete acceptance that I had been wrong, not just about my methods, but about my fundamental assumption that I had the right to control her life. She's remarried now, to a man named David Chin who's nothing like Marcus. David is quiet where Marcus was flashy, honest where Marcus was deceptive, content where Marcus was always scheming for more. They have a 2-year-old son named Michael, and another baby on the way. Sarah is happy in a way she never was with Marcus, and David treats her with the respect and devotion she deserved all along. But the scars from Marcus's betrayal and my revenge still linger. Sarah's new career at a smaller accounting firm has worked out better than expected, but she'll never fully recover the professional momentum she lost during those months of suspension and investigation. She's made peace with that reality, but I haven't. Every time I see her working late to make up for lost opportunities, every time she mentions a promotion that went to someone else, I remember that my choices contributed to those setbacks. Marcus served his time and disappeared from Chicago completely. Last I heard, he was living in Phoenix, working in construction under a different name, trying to rebuild a life from the ashes of his old one. Amanda and their daughter Hope are doing well in Ohio. Hope is 4 years old now, smart and beautiful, and will grow up knowing that her father chose his own selfish desires over his responsibility to her. As for me, I'm still in the same house where Sarah grew up, where Linda and I built our life together, where I planned and executed the destruction of my daughter's marriage. But I'm different now. Smaller, maybe? More aware of my limitations and the damage that good intentions can cause when they're not guided by wisdom. The counseling helped, both the court-ordered sessions related to my harassment charges and the family counseling Sarah and I did together. I learned things about myself that I didn't want to know. About my need to control situations and people. About the way my love for Sarah had become possessive and paternalistic. About how my grief over Linda's death had never fully healed and had made me overprotective of the one family member I had left. I learned that revenge and justice aren't the same thing, even when they produce the same outcomes. Marcus deserved to face consequences for his actions, the embezzlement, the systematic betrayal of trust, the cruelty toward women who believed his lies. But my desire to orchestrate those consequences, to control exactly how and when his world fell apart, had been about my needs, not Sarah's. Real justice would have been giving Sarah the information she needed to make her own choices about her marriage and her future. Real protection would have been trusting her to be strong enough to handle the truth, even if it was painful. Instead, I'd appointed myself judge, jury, and executioner in a case where I should have been a witness and a source of support. The hardest lesson was accepting that Sarah might have made different choices if I'd been honest from the beginning. Maybe she would have confronted Marcus immediately, and given him a chance to change. Maybe she would have tried couples counseling or sought professional help to save their marriage. Maybe she would have left him anyway, but on her own terms and in her own time. I'll never know what might have happened if I'd trusted her with the truth from that first night, and that uncertainty is something I have to live with forever. But here's what I do know: Sarah is stronger than I ever gave her credit for. She survived Marcus's betrayal. She survived my deception. She rebuilt her career, found love again, started a family, and learned to trust her own judgment in a way that's beautiful to watch. She didn't need me to protect her from Marcus's lies. She needed me to trust her with the truth so she could protect herself. The other thing I learned is that families can survive almost anything if they're willing to do the hard work of forgiveness and change. Sarah could have cut me out of her life completely after she discovered my role in Marcus's downfall. She had every right to decide that my betrayal was as damaging as his, that she couldn't trust either of the men who claimed to love her. But she chose differently. She chose the harder path of working through the damage, of rebuilding trust one conversation at a time, of teaching me how to love her better. It wasn't easy. There were months when we barely spoke, when every interaction was formal and careful. There were sessions with Dr. Patricia Wells, the family therapist who helped us navigate the wreckage of our relationship, where Sarah would cry and I would sit there feeling like the monster I'd become in my pursuit of justice. "Your father loves you," Dr. Wells told Sarah during one particularly difficult session. "But he loves you in a way that doesn't trust your strength or respect your autonomy. He sees you as someone who needs to be protected rather than someone who needs to be supported." Sarah nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. "I know he loves me. But love without trust isn't really love, is it? It's just control disguised as care." That hit me like a physical blow because it was true. In my desperation to protect Sarah from pain, I'd caused her a different kind of pain. In my determination to shield her from Marcus's deception, I'd deceived her myself. The turning point came during a session in February 2021. Sarah was talking about her struggles at work, about colleagues who still whispered about her involvement in Marcus's scandal, about clients who questioned her judgment. "I keep thinking about what might have been different if Dad had just told me the truth that first night," she said. "Maybe I would have made mistakes. Maybe I would have believed Marcus's lies and given him another chance he didn't deserve. But they would have been my mistakes to make." I wanted to argue, to explain again that I'd been trying to protect her, that I'd been gathering evidence to ensure Marcus couldn't escape consequences. But Dr. Wells caught my eye and shook her head slightly. "What do you wish your father had done instead?" she asked Sarah. "I wish he had trusted me," Sarah said simply. "I wish he had believed that I was strong enough to handle the truth and smart enough to make good decisions with that information. I wish he had seen me as an adult who could solve her own problems instead of a child who needed to be rescued." That night, I went home and wrote Sarah a letter. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter on paper, the way people used to communicate when words mattered more than speed. I told her everything I should have said months earlier. That she was right about my need to control situations. That I had failed to trust her strength and wisdom. That my love for her had become possessive and paternalistic in ways that dishonored the independent, capable woman she'd become. I apologized not just for deceiving her, but for not believing in her. For treating her like someone who needed to be managed rather than someone who deserved to be respected. Most importantly, I promised to do better. To ask instead of assuming. To support instead of controlling. To trust her judgment even when I disagreed with her choices. Sarah kept that letter for 2 years before she told me about it. Said she read it whenever she was struggling to forgive me, whenever the anger threatened to overwhelm her love. It helped me understand that you weren't just sorry for getting caught, she explained. You were sorry for the person you'd become. And you were committed to becoming someone different. The road back to trust was long and sometimes painful. Sarah tested my promises, challenged my assumptions, called me out whenever I slipped back into old patterns of control. She made me earn her respect again, one interaction at a time. But we made it. Slowly, carefully, with help from Dr. Wells and patience from both of us, we rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect instead of paternal protection. When Sarah got engaged to David, she asked me to walk her down the aisle. Not because tradition demanded it, but because she'd chosen to trust me with that honor despite everything I'd done wrong. You're not giving me away, she told me as we practiced the ceremony. You're walking beside me as I choose my own future. There's a difference. There was indeed a difference, and it meant everything. Now, 4 years later, I watched Sarah navigate marriage and motherhood with the wisdom and strength I should have recognized from the beginning. She and David make decisions together, share responsibilities equally, communicate with the kind of honesty that Marcus never understood and I had to learn too late. When little Michael falls down and scrapes his knee, Sarah doesn't rush to fix everything for him. She comforts him, helps him clean the wound, and then encourages him to get back to playing. She's teaching him that pain is temporary, that he's strong enough to handle life's difficulties, that love means support rather than control. She's a better parent than I was, and that gives me hope for the future. As for the lessons I've learned about revenge and justice, they're complex and sometimes contradictory. Marcus did deserve consequences for his actions. His affairs were cruel, his embezzlement was criminal, and his treatment of the women who trusted him was predatory. But consequences and justice aren't the same thing as revenge and control. Justice would have been Marcus facing legal charges for his embezzlement, and his victims making informed decisions about their relationships with him. Revenge was me orchestrating his downfall for my own satisfaction, manipulating the timing and method of his exposure to maximize his pain. The difference matters more than I understood at the time. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never seen Marcus at that club, if I'd never discovered his affairs, if Sarah had figured out the truth on her own timeline. Would she have been happier not knowing? Would she have wasted more years on a man who didn't deserve her love? But those questions miss the point. The issue was never whether Sarah was better off knowing or not knowing about Marcus's betrayal. The issue was whether she had the right to make that determination for herself. She did. She always did. And I took that right away from her when I appointed myself the keeper of truth in her life. For those of you watching this from places where family loyalty and personal justice intersect, whether you're in small-town America where everyone knows everyone's business, or big cities where people disappear into anonymity, I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. Love isn't protection from truth. Love is trust in someone's ability to handle truth. Love isn't solving problems for people. Love is supporting them while they solve their own problems. And sometimes, the people we love will make choices we don't understand or agree with. Sometimes they'll trust the wrong people, ignore red flags we can see clearly, stay in situations we know are harmful. That's their right. That's what autonomy means. That's what respect looks like. I failed to understand that when it mattered most, and it cost both Sarah and me years of pain that could have been avoided if I'd simply trusted her to be the strong, wise woman I'd raised her to become. The story of Marcus Thompson didn't end the way I planned. He faced consequences, yes, but not the complete destruction I'd envisioned. He served his time, paid partial restitution, and found a way to rebuild his life somewhere else. He never became the completely broken man I'd wanted him to become. And that's probably for the best. Revenge is a poison that hurts the person seeking it as much as the person it targets. My need to see Marcus destroyed had consumed me for months, had twisted my love for Sarah into something possessive and controlling. Justice doesn't require complete destruction. It requires appropriate consequences and the opportunity for redemption. Marcus got that chance, even if he didn't deserve it. The real victory wasn't Marcus's downfall, it was Sarah's recovery. Her ability to rebuild her life, find love again, create the family she'd always wanted. Her strength in forgiving me despite my betrayal of her trust. Her wisdom in teaching me how to love her better. That's what justice looks like, not the destruction of people who hurt us, but the restoration of people who were hurt. If you've made it this far in my story, if you've watched from wherever you are, from the mountains of Colorado to the beaches of California, from the suburbs of Ohio to the farmlands of Kansas, then you know that some stories don't have clean endings. Marcus is gone from our lives, but the impact of his betrayal and my revenge will always be part of our family's history. Sarah and I have rebuilt our relationship, but we both remember what it felt like when trust was broken. We're closer now in some ways, more honest with each other, but we'll never be naive again about the damage that deception can cause. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe wisdom comes from surviving mistakes and betrayals and learning to trust again anyway. Maybe strength comes from being broken and choosing to heal instead of seeking revenge. I don't know if I'd do things differently if I had the chance to go back to that October night in 2019. I'd like to think I would trust Sarah with the truth immediately, that I would support her choices instead of trying to control them. But I can't be sure. What I can be sure of is this: love requires trust, justice requires wisdom, and revenge requires nothing but anger. I chose anger for too long, and it nearly cost me the most important relationship in my life. Don't make the same mistake I did. If you love someone, trust them with the truth. If someone wrongs you, seek justice through proper channels. If you're tempted by revenge, remember that it's a fire that burns everything it touches, including the person who lights the match. Thank you for listening to my story, for staying with me through all the ugly truths and difficult lessons. If this helped you think differently about love or justice or family loyalty, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you're dealing with betrayal or deception in your own life, remember that you're stronger than you think and that healing is possible, even when the wounds feel too deep to ever close. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from, and whether you think I made the right choices or the wrong ones. I'm still learning, still trying to be better, still grateful every day that my daughter found it in her heart to forgive a foolish old man who loved her too much and trusted her too little. Some stories end with justice. Some end with revenge. The best ones end with redemption. This is one of those stories.